Hey guys, it's Mrs. Weiser. This video is for anybody that was absent on Monday, November 10th. This goes with the ratio notes that are on the What You Missed board. So the goal of this lesson is to understand the concept of a ratio, and the hardest part is, can you describe the relationship in a ratio? And I'm going to teach you how to do that. So let's talk about some ratio basics here. First of all, what is a ratio, or what are ratios? Ratios compare two numbers by division. They can be written in three different ways. We can write it with a colon. And let me show you an example. So for example, 3:4, that's a ratio. We could write it as a fraction. So instead of 3:4, 3/4. And the last way is to use the word 2 between the two numbers. Sorry, just finishing up writing this. So in our example, this would become 3:4. So those are the three different ways you could write a ratio, all of them expressing the ratio 3 of something, and you're comparing it to 4 of something else. And there's three different kinds of ratios. We can have a part to part. We can have a part to whole. And the last one is compare a whole to a part. Okay. So let's try some examples where we're going to write a ratio in all those different ways that we talked about, and then we'll talk about the different kinds of ratios that we're writing. So in letter A, it says write the ratio of squares to total shapes. Notice how I'm underlining the word squares, and I'm underlining the words total shapes. That way I make sure I think about how many squares there are and how many total shapes there are, and remembering to use those numbers in my ratio. So the number of squares is 3. And the total shapes in the picture, well, I have 7 total shapes. And one way I could write this is with a colon. So I could write 3:7. That's one form, or one way to write this ratio. We could use the word 2 between 3 and 7. We could say 3:7. That's another way to write the ratio. Or I could write it as a fraction and have 3/7. And that's the ratio of squares to total shapes, and it's written in all three forms, or all three ways. If we think about what kind of ratio this is, well, this is a part to whole ratio, because we're comparing the part of the picture that are squares to the whole thing, the total shapes that would be the whole. All right, let's look at letter B. Write the ratio of squares to triangles in all three forms. Again, I'm underlining the word squares and triangles to make sure I count the right thing. So how many squares do I have? I have 3 squares. How many triangles are there? 4 triangles. So the ratio is 3:4. And that's with a colon. That's because that's one way. We could use the word 2 between 3 and 4 and say 3:4. And the last way is to write it as a fraction, 3/4. So those are three different ways to write the ratio of the number of squares to the number of triangles. What kind of ratio did we just write? We just wrote a part-to-part ratio because we compared the part that are squares to the part that is triangles. All right, last one here, example C, says write the ratio of total shapes to triangles. If I look at how many total shapes I have, that's 7. If I look at how many triangles I have, that's 4. So this ratio would be 7:4. That's one way. I could write 7/4. That's another way. Or I could write 7/4. That's the third way. If I look at what kind of ratio did I just write, or did we just write, this is a whole to part ratio because we're comparing total shapes, which is the whole picture, to triangles, the part of the picture that are triangles, whole to part. Okay, so hopefully that helped you understand the different ways to write a ratio and understand the different types of ratios that we can write. Now we're going to talk about equivalent ratios. Equivalent ratios are two ratios that are equal. A common way to express a ratio is in simplest form. In simplest form means you reduce your ratio. I'm going to show you how to do that if you're a little confused on what that means. So let's look at an example D. It says, write the ratio of stars to circles in simplest form. Let's do that part first. So we're comparing stars to circles. If I count how many stars I have, I would count 12 stars. And then if I count how many circles there are, there's 18 circles. So that ratio is 18:12. The problem is that ratio is not in simplest form. The way we get things in simplest form is we divide the top and the bottom by the same number. And it's best if you can think of the biggest number that goes into both 12 and 18 because then it's less work. You don't have to keep dividing the top and bottom by numbers over and over again if we do it by the biggest number. So the biggest number that goes into both 12 and 18 is 6. So if we divide 12 by 6, we get 2. And if we divide 18 by 6, we get 3. So there's the answer to that first part. The ratio of stars to circles in simplest form is 2:3. All right, let's look at the second part. So the second part of this says, then describe the relationship between stars and circles in your ratio. So what does the ratio 2:3 really mean as far as the relationship between stars and circles? Well, 2 represents the stars. So for every 2 stars, there are 3 what? 3 represented circles. And we want to word it just like that. We want to use the words for every something something, there is or there are blank. That's how you should word every description of a ratio because that's what it truly means. And I'll kind of prove it to you guys in the picture up here. So let me start circling 2 stars and 3 circles. So let's see here. Here would be 2 stars and 3 circles. 2 stars, 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 3 circles. So that's true statement. For every 2 stars, there are 3 circles in that picture. And something even crazier is look how many groups we just circled. There's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 groups of this ratio. And hey, look at that. That's what we divided by here to reduce this ratio or to make it simplest form. That's because the ratio 12 to 18 is 6 groups of the ratio 2/3. All right, guys, last example. So we're going to use that same picture, but this time we're going to write a different type of ratio. We're going to write the ratio of total shapes to stars, but again, we're going to write it in simplest form. Now, you don't need to go and count all those shapes again. If you remember back from example D, that picture had 12 stars and 18 circles. If we add those together, we're going to have total shapes. So that means there are 30 total shapes. So we're going to have 30 over number of stars. Remember, stars was 12. So 30 over 12 is our ratio. Let's go ahead and put it in simplest form. So again, we're going to divide the top and the bottom by the same number. What's the biggest number that you can think of that goes into 30 and 12? Well, that would be 6. 30 divided by 6 would be 5. 12 divided by 6 would be 2. So that simplified ratio of total shapes to stars is 5 to 2. All right, let's go to the second part. Then describe the relationship between total shapes and stars in your ratio. So it's just saying, well, what does that ratio mean? 5 total shapes to 2 stars. Remember how we used that for every blank there are blank in the last one? Well, we want to do the same thing here. When we describe a ratio, we should be using those words. For every blank, there are blank. So here's our description. For every 5 shapes, there are 2 stars. And that's true. If you look back in your picture and at those circles that I made, okay, when I put together the 2 stars and the 3 circles, there are 2 stars for every 5 shapes. All right, guys, this is the end of the video lesson. So from here, all you need to do is glue these into your notes. And we have an activity that we're going to be doing in class together to see what you learned on this.